Well, I understand Donald Trump's priority is to take Canadian jobs and move them to the United States. He's been very blunt about that. What I don't understand is why Prime Minister Carney would help him do it with an industrial carbon tax on our steel and aluminum products.
I agree. I find it to be too much of a conflict of interest that Mark Carney would be investing all of his money into the United States, into other pipelines around the world, while telling Canadians that there's no market for it. Welcome back to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. Mark Carney's announcement about capitulating to Donald Trump is bad for him politically, and I hear the mainstream media trying to convince you that it's something other than that, but it's absolutely 100% unconditional surrender. Mark Carney the Liberal parties have again tarnished our reputation. Now, when you look at people that sit on the left side of the spectrum, they don't really seem to possess shame. They don't really seem to possess the comprehension of what honor and those kinds of things are. So perhaps to them, it's not a big deal. But for the most of us, for the most part of Canada, we see that the world is now treating us like a joke. They're laughing at us. They consider Mark Carney to be what we would say is a clown. Our economic destruction, our downward spiral is becoming more and more profound with every passing day because the rest of the world has decided to keep up with Donald Trump. So they're getting shovels in the ground. They're generating their economy. They're stimulating growth in their individual sectors. But this is a problem for Mark Carney. This announcement that he made today about Donald Trump really opens up a vulnerability that the Liberals have been weaving and dodging and avoiding for 11 years now. There's nowhere for the products to go except inside of Canada. Nobody wants the steel in Europe. Nobody wants the steel in America. Nobody wants the steel in China. They don't want the aluminum either. Canadians want homes. Canadians want a middle-class lifestyle. The Liberal Party has been targeting the middle-class lifestyle for 10 years now. It gets smaller and smaller with every passing moment. They want everybody crammed into high density while they live in mansions. And they've been trying to convince everybody that they're doing that because of the environment. They've been doing that because it's okay. Canada is getting a lot of foreign investment. Canada is getting other countries to come in to buy the very materials that the Liberal parties have passed laws against me and you having, to buy the very land that they have passed laws against me and you having. So now Mark Carney's in a really bad position. He's painted himself into the corner. On the one hand, he has the Liberal Party screaming, environmental. I mean, Julie DeBruzen was also out in the news today. We know that Mark Carney is quietly trying to hide all of this, that he's embarrassed by his loss, because we know this because he made this announcement afternoon on a Friday. Anybody who's got even the smallest understanding of the media knows that the news cycle at afternoon on Friday is the quietest time of the entire week. The hope is that you will have forgotten all about it by Monday. Of course, I'm hoping that you will remember it and right up until we can get Mark Carney and the Liberal Party out of office once and for all. However, I don't want to go too far down that news cycle and the blatant attempt to try and bury this capitulation, Mark Carney's complete reversal, complete 100% unconditional surrender to Donald Trump, to the Americans, to the economy that is the United States. We can say for sure that the economy of the United States is still going to be very much closed off to Canada. We can further say that China's not interested in our steel or aluminum. And we can also say that the Europeans are not interested in our steel or aluminum. There's no way in the world that they're trying to allow us into the munitions plan that they have, as they've already made deals with Donald Trump. So Mark Carney is in a bad way, right? He has really only three choices. The first choice is that he can resign, but his ego is not going to allow him to do that. That's what he should do if he was smart. I'm telling you that from a neutral third-party standpoint, understanding the personality and understanding the ego, like from a first-hand position. I can tell you that the smart move for him to make would be to tender his resignation and run away with his tail between his legs. He's not going to do that, though, I should imagine. Parts of his mind are still going to try to convince himself that he can pull this off. The other problem that he has is that his party is filled with a lot of environmental zealots, right? That's, it's not about people who are looking to solve a problem. They're not even willing to admit that where the problems lie. They simply are fanatics who, anybody who has had any dealing with fanatics, especially the kind that are into the religious fanatics. I mean, I'm not talking about the people that are rooting for the Maple Leafs and painting their faces blue or anything like that. I'm talking about, these individuals who will not take anything other than what they feel is the difference. And we can see that in Julie DeBruza. We can see that in Stephen Guilbeault. So now there's two little barriers that are happening for Mark Carney. Everybody realizes the American market's closed. Everybody realizes Europe is closed. So what's left? Well, he can take Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives' ideas of getting everything up and running. To do so, all he has to do is remove 5 bodies of legislation. I think it's 5 bodies of legislation primarily that are put in place to keep industry down. And once he removes those, yes, his own party will lose their minds because they're the ones that put it there, with the help of the NDP. So, but there's a worse wrinkle than that, right? Because once he removes them, he becomes irrelevant. So now he doesn't have any say whatsoever. And the only thing that'll be left to him is what traditionally is looked after by the federal government. And we know that he doesn't have any standing on the diplomatic stage. We know that most of the world is laughing behind their hands at him, looking at him and pointing. Most of them are not even inviting him into the room. So he's got this problem where if he tries to stick to his guns, the Canadian population are going to see within 60 days that it's a disaster and that he doesn't know what he's doing. And then they'll start to, his polls numbers will tank and it'll go right back to where we were, which is probably what will happen. Or he can try to appease industry. He can try to do, get the jobs up and running. But then the simple thing for him to do is to remove all of the legislation that's in the way. There's no job that he can claim is going to be nation building without removing this legislation or presenting himself as a control freak who has to be in charge of every last signature, which will, of course, only slow the process down. Had the Liberal Party not enacted this legislation, we wouldn't be in this problem, guys. The industry would have already been up and running. And some of the legislation so we have, the Clean Electricity Regulations, the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act, the Impact Assessment Act, the Oil and Gas Emissions Cap, the Net Zero Vehicle Mandate, and the West Coast Oil Tanker Ban, just to name a few of the legislation that has to be removed. Now, he can leave the car one there if he wants to. I'm pretty sure that will be all it takes to push Canadians over the edge. Like the idea that he thinks he's going to be able to cram down Canadians' throats this electric car that doesn't work, that nobody wants, and is twice the price. I'm fairly certain that would be like a disaster waiting to happen. And if he tries to continue that, I assure you that that's probably going to be enough to tip the scales in very many parts of the rural regions of this country. He might be able to hold on to downtown Toronto, and he might be able to hold on to Montreal. But for the most part, everybody else is going to be pretty saying no to the electric vehicle mandate. Of course, the problem is that the automotive builders, the guys that have to hold 20% of their inventory on the lot of their car dealer, has to be an electric car. Oh, they're the people that are going to be the ones that give us the jobs. So again, I come back to it. He's painted himself into a corner. He's stuck between his own fanatical positions and the reality of how we're going to build the economy. And there's nowhere for him to turn, and there's no more excuses that can be offered. Oh, I get that the CBC, the CTV, and Global are going to try to do their best, but their audience shrinks with every passing moment. The less money people have in their pocket, the less people believe that these media outlets are interested in what's best for the person that's listening to them. On top of it all, one thing that he used to try to say is that we're going to be an energy superpower. I'm going to be doing a lot of content on that because there's just nothing, that the two statements don't match. However, this year, 2025, in an effort to get Mark Carney to snap out of it, to get the Liberal Party to realize that Canadians have had enough, there was an open letter drafted by 39 CEOs in Canada, 39 people who essentially work in the energy industry, asking Mark Carney to get rid of some of the legislation that I just talked about. Pipeline bans, emission caps, all of the things that are horrible legislation that harm industry, but all of the things that Stephen Guilbeault probably, puts wallpaper on his apartment with. So it's, again, like I tell you, Mark Carney is in a no-win situation right now. He painted himself into a corner, and I reiterate, the smartest move he can make, if any of you, if Mark Carney happens to be listening to this, is to tender his resignation and just quietly go into live in one of your mansions over in Europe and wait for the whole thing to forget that you ever existed, because this is going to really go bad for you, in the sense that you can't win. The only way to solve the problem is to follow Pierre Poilievre's ideas, which he happily says he will even walk into your office and give you the ideas. He's got it all laid out. You don't even have to put any time and effort into drafting it. He's got it all ready and raring to go. Of course, that will mean the Liberal Party, for the most part, will turn against you. The Canadian population is waiting to get paid. They want houses. They don't want apartments. They don't want electric cars. Again, the Liberal Party, you have to pick which one you're going to go with, and there's a no either which way, it's going to come crashing down around you. And honestly, you should realize that that's primarily because the policies of hunger, starvation, and poverty are not something that the population is going to sign on for happily. However, the 39 CEOs drafted this letter, and it's a pretty good letter. I'll leave a link to it down in the description. And I I could read it and tell you, but it's got 5 real components to it, 5 main parts that they've broken down. And remember, these are CEOs. These are individuals who speak Mark Carney's language, who understand they have primarily going to have the same education as most of the individuals that go through economy and business school and all the rest of that. There might be some other specialties in like educations and the like, but these are individuals that have access to a Mark Carney on their staff, like right there in the boardroom. So it's not something that they're not talking about, outside of his comprehension. This is not something that Mark Carney isn't already aware of. Just that his zealotry, his religious zealotry gets in the way, because that's the Liberal Party. That's the far left. They don't want to make compromises. It's either do it their way or else. So in this letter, this 39 CEO open letter, it's called Build Canada Now, an urgent action plan to strengthen the economic sovereignty. Step 1, simplify regulation. I told y'all that to get the regulation out of the way is step 1. And of course, the second that they do that, the Liberal Party becomes irrelevant. So now that whole entire arm of government is losing their minds. Step 2, commit to firm deadline for project approvals. I think that we should go a little further and just remove the necessity of the federal government completely. I mean, many of these approvals can be looked after by the province, and why should we have the federal government approving? Why should the federal government say that something is not acceptable in Nova Scotia, so therefore they can't do it in Manitoba? Makes no sense to me. Grow production. Of course, that again is a problem because there are so many regulations against, building buildings, bending a blade of grass, turning over a leaf. Oh, Lord, good Lord. I mean, people are going to be chaining themselves to the sidewalks next. That's, of course, the step that needs to happen. And you've heard all of this from Pierre Poilievre. It's just that the mainstream media wants to try to convince you that it's better to have poverty. Or remember them when they were like, we're going to be building the green economy of the future. Well, where's that? It turns out that green economy that all of Canadians were putting their entire prosperity on hold for has yet to materialize. Attract investment. Now, without the first one getting out of the way, there's no way in the world. There's just no way. I mean, imagine in your mind that we have all of this natural resources. We have a workforce ready because they are desperate to get some work. Not desperate, but they really, really want some work. They also want to have their own house. They want all this stuff. So they're ready, willing, and able. And we can't get people to come in and put shovels in the ground because the Liberal government's legislation is in the way. And step 5 is to bring on the First Nations into all of it. And I can show you an article where the First Nations in British Columbia are feeling that they got ripped off. They feel like they were hoodwinked into signing an agreement to have the tanker ban because they want to sell that LNG to China or anybody else that can buy it. Now, I'm not going to do that in this video because I don't want this one to be too long. I want you to understand that the position that Mark Carney's in, because we have to keep the pressure on. The pressure has to maintain no matter what the CBC and the CTV are trying to convince you. Mark Carney has embarrassed us, has humiliated us on the world stage. He has humiliated himself. He talked a big tough talk, and then in the end, he ran away like a scared person. Before that, we had Justin Trudeau running up and down the world, just basically flipping off every world leader on the planet. 4th largest economy, 2nd largest economy, largest economy. I mean, these are things that the Canadians are suffering as a whole for. We have to have a leader that is, recognized as being somebody that can at least be respected. I'm not telling you that he has to be the military. I'm not telling you he has to be any of that. But with every time that our leader diminishes himself on the world stage, we as a whole are diminished. We as a people are diminished. And that's not something that sits comfortable with me, and that's not something that sits comfortable with anybody. So if the left-wing media wants to tell you that, pride and honor is nothing to worry about, and if you agree with that, then I suppose all the power to you. I, for one, do not agree with that. I don't believe that. I believe that, taking pride in who you are is something that is as old as time. Nonetheless, these CEOs have written this letter. And Mark Carney is in a position now where he has to pick. There's no more, we're going to get in business with them or that. That's all gone. That's all over. That's all finished. You are barely holding on over there, Mr. Carney. You're going to have to pick up the scraps of whatever's left of your dignity and realize that you're either going to have to get your party in line. You're going to have to take all of the ideas from the CEOs that have written you this letter. I mean, these are some of the biggest electricity companies or energy companies, in Canada. I forgot to show you that part. Let's look at some of the signatures. Oh yeah, look, Northern Midstream, Arc Resources Limited, In Play Oil Corp, Questrine Energy, Vern Inc., Pipeline Inc., Energy. All these names have the energy or pipeline or resources in their title. And then we come through it, and this is who the letter was for, all 4 leaders of the federal government, right? So Mark Carney, Pierre Poilievre, Jagmeet, who's no longer the leader, but I guess they had nobody else to put there, and Yves-François Blanchet. And then you come down a little bit, and look, some more signatures. So if Mark Carney is serious about becoming a energy superpower, which I hate the term. I hate the term catalyzed too. I mean, that's just ridiculous. But if he really wants to turn Canada into a place that can provide energy to the world, like say Saudi Arabia does, or like the Americans are doing, then he is going to have to listen to the people that are on the ground. He's going to have to listen to the people that sell the energy. And that's where it's going to implode for Mark Carney, because when we come to that nexus of him taking conservatives' ideas and him telling his own party that they have to sit, and their whole ideas have to be abandoned, and when he turns around and realizes that no matter which way he goes, he either makes himself look foolish with his book values or he turns his entire party against him. I mean, like I said at the beginning, the smartest move for him to make is to just tender his resignation and go quietly away so that he can not have to navigate any of this mess. Canadians can elect a conservative government. We can get all of this legislation out of the way. And, within 6 or 7 months, we might even be able to start to see a return in our economy. As it currently holds, we're barely going to be looking at a return in the next year. And the amount of problems that are going to happen for Canada are going to be significant because the American economy is not waiting. And by Christmas, we are going to be looking across the border. They're going to be floating in money, and we are going to be looking at ourselves wondering how come, a loaf of bread is $15. So we really need to keep the pressure on. It's time that Mark Carney and the Liberal government understand that their policies, Canadians were interested in trying it because it sounded nice. Now we understand what the consequences are, and those policies are not welcome anymore for the bulk of the country. Maybe in downtown Toronto, maybe in downtown Montreal, but otherwise the rest of the country is interested in getting money, having their own house, snug as a bug in a rug, and having prosperity for not only themselves, but for their neighbors. Let's bring the middle class back to Canada. All right, I'm going to wrap here. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.